Hello, I'm Stuart Childs and you're welcome to the Dairy Age, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. The Irish Grassland Association Annual Dairy Conference is taking place on Wednesday the 18th of January in the Charleville Park Hotel. This is a very popular event, so I've asked Vincent Griffith, who is Farm Profitability Specialist at Aurivo Co-Op and is also chairperson of the IGA Dairy Conference Committee, to give me a preview of what people can expect from the day. As always, the IGA offer a highly relevant and interesting mix of information, and this year will be no different. Session 1, which is entitled Where to From Here, is going to focus on the potential impact of banding. So as banding has become a reality since the 1st of January, which may come as a surprise to many, I asked Vincent to outline how the session is going to pan out and what Noreen Lacey of IFAC and David Fennelly, who is a dairy farmer in County Laois, are going to speak about.
We're going to look at the costs on farms and what are the options available to farmers. So as everyone knows, if you take the banding, there's basically three bands there now, and like one band will see a kind of reduction on lower output herds below 4,500 kilos, and you have the middle band, and then you have the higher band as well, which is going up to 106 kgs of nitrogen. So Noreen's going to look at that, like for farms maybe that if they're in derogation, what will that mean to them? What are the financial costs? Like, so if we take it farms at the top end of the derogation, they could have to look at different options, be it taking on more land or reducing cow numbers. So I suppose we're going to look at the costs of that and what are the options that farmers have to do that. So it should be a really, really interesting paper because it'll put the figures in black and white in front of farmers.
And then David is going to look at it from a farming perspective. So the Fennellys have a very high production herd in terms of milk solids in particular, but they're on the cusp of or they're going to be affected by the changes, I presume, are they?
I suppose David's just going to give his approach to how they're going to farm over the next few years. And look, as you know yourselves, Stuart, there's people that are kind of on the edge, like they could be at the top end of the middle band, we'll call it, and maybe a bit of work around bull selection and things like that to take down the litres, because you're not affected in terms of kilos of milk solids sold. So, I mean, obviously, as well in terms of looking at investments in the future in terms of slurry storage, and things like adapting technologies around nitrogen use as well. Like, so obviously clover is a big one, and we obviously have a separate session, but David's going to give his outlook on how he'll tell their story in terms of where they've got to so far and then how they're going to navigate the next kind of 5 years, you can say, really, in terms of the new era and in terms of the new nitrate rules.
Yeah, and that'll be an important element, I suppose, for because there is just an adaptation phase that people are going to have to go through here to get used to the different areas or the different bendings, and where they sit in them and so forth. So that, like what David's planning out there, will be a good kind of blueprint almost for people to have a kind of an overview of what they need to think about for their own farm as well.
Yeah, and probably like we're probably going to, in one sense, when we've talked about stocking rates previously, we'd have talked about livestock units per hectare, but really with the three bands, you've got to talk about, organic nitrogen per hectare, because, the different cows aren't equal to each other anymore in terms of stocking rate. So that's an important aspect that people have to get their head around, and we'll discuss that in the session as well.
Yeah, so I suppose moving on to session 2 then, Vinny, like as I said at the outset there, the IGA always likes to try to have its finger on the pulse in terms of what's affecting farmers, and everybody's probably aware at this stage we would have covered these in previous events with the IGA in the past in relation to labour on farms, and we'll say people involved on dairy farms obviously, but you're looking at it from a slightly different angle in this year's conference, in that you're looking at the role that technology can play, and you're also going to look at some efficiency. So you've John Upton in relation to efficiency, obviously very important around the whole hike in electricity prices and costs and so forth, and I suppose even just the demand that farms are going to be putting on for electricity, and there's issues around that in terms of the evening milking clashing with peak requirements and so forth. And then you've also got Francis Nolan, we'll say a dairy farmer from County Kilkenny, who's put in a share of technology onto his farm in order to try to make life easier for him. So again, I suppose we've the kind of the heavy element with John, and then the more practical element with Francis, I suppose.
Yeah, so I suppose, sure, we all know John and all the work he's done with energy efficiency in the dairy industry the last probably 10 years. So he's got some really interesting data on that. And I suppose as part of that as well, there's been a huge uptick in interest in things like putting in solar energy on farming. It's a big investment, but obviously you said yourself, we're at record in electricity prices. So there's a huge amount of interest in that. John's going to go through that. But I think an important element for all dairy farmers is to look at efficiency first. There's a lot you can do before you get to the putting on solar panels, and it will be the right decision for some farms to put on solar, but there's a lot of steps before that in terms of reducing energy usage to correct use of plate cooler, variable speed pumps, and John's going to kind of walk us through that and maybe give farmers a flavour of what a really energy efficient dairy farm will look like, and then looking at the steps in around a larger investment in terms of putting in solar panels. What are the steps? What are the grants available for farmers? And again, that question around if you take solar, that'll vary from farm to farm with energy usage, whether the farm is on a 3-phase or single-phase electricity, and they all make a difference to payback time and usage, and as well as the usage of batteries on in conjunction with a solar system as well. So, like I said, there's a lot of work. John has done a lot of work, and I think it'll be a really interesting session because, like I know you've probably been saying yourself, Stuart, you talk to dairy farmers and there's kind of shocked at the moment at the size of electricity bills the last 3 or 4 months, and people are looking at ways to reduce them, and maybe in time do something like solar. There might be a payback over 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, well, I think it's a point that's been made to me by several farmers is that exactly as you said there's maybe there can be quite a bit that can actually be done inside the farm gate, and John is going to look at all the elements of it in terms of, and he pushes that a lot, but I think a lot of people probably get sucked into the idea of the investment piece rather than actually looking and seeing what are they doing first before they ever invest, and that's probably an important piece that they need to hear from John. Again, I suppose John has to keep saying it for people to realise that I suppose the hike in the electricity costs will probably be the catalyst for people to start looking at what they are doing first before they go spending the money on the equipment. So then we'll say Francis's piece then, we'll say, as I said, is looking at the investments that he's made on the farm in terms of improving his infrastructure, I suppose, so that he has good facilities, and also embracing technology to try and make life easier for him. Can you just outline that a little bit more for me?
Absolutely, like Francis, like another, he's on the signpost program as well with Tyrone, but he's done a lot of work over the last few years in his farm, and you've got kind of, we call the heavy infrastructure that makes a big difference to labour efficiency on a farm, and then there's the newer technologies, be it heat detection systems or whatever. And I suppose there's a lot of money being invested on dairy farms at the moment. There's been a fairly good financial year, but I suppose what we're hoping to get from Francis and his paper is to like that kind of decision-making process when you are looking to invest, to make the best use of money, because technologies will definitely help run your farm, but you can get into ones that maybe aren't really that beneficial, and you're into kind of gadgets more so than things that are making a real difference to your labour efficiency and your work-life balance. So like, I suppose Francis will go, again, he'll tell his own story about his own farming system, but he'll go through his thought process about investments and how he best targets to put investments that give the best return on investment. Because like heat detection systems are 20,000-30,000, they're a large investment, and you want to be sure the money you are spending, you're getting a good return on it. And I suppose that's what we're hoping to get out of that session, because there is a lot of money being spent on dairy farms at the moment.
Yeah, so to make sure that the money that's there is being used wisely, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like as you said, like it's not a labour session, but this stuff kind of touches on that in terms of there's a full employment for the country. Labour and getting people to work on farms is difficult. So even technology can make it a more a nicer place to work, and maybe easier to attract and retain labour as well.
Yeah, very good. So the last session, as I said, just trying to keep your finger on the pulse, but probably nothing dramatically new in one way, really. We've been talking again for a number of years about trying to reduce nitrogen applications, but again, it's really beginning to hit home now, catalysed also, I suppose, by the massive ramp up in fertiliser prices in the last 12-15 months. And people maybe dabbling with a little bit less nitrogen last year, whether it was calculated or otherwise. Basically they used less nitrogen, as we know from the national statistics, with a drop of nearly 30%, I think it was, in terms of nitrogen bought. But like we'll say, we are going to have to live with lesser amounts of nitrogen clover is a big part of that, because we know from work that's been done in terms of modelling work by Elodie Rowell that if we take out the nitrogen and we don't do something to try to help grow the grass, we're just going to reduce our grass production. So if we do that, obviously that impacts on our ability to carry a certain stocking rate. So we've two of our own people from Teagasc, in terms of Mike Egan and Mike Deneen, talking about white clover and red clover. And then again, we've that farmer element of it. So we've Robert O'Dea then that's going to speak in relation to how he has actually gone a long way down the road that people are going to be challenged to go down in terms of reducing his amount of nitrogen used. So I suppose I'll just get you to outline what's Mike Egan going to talk about first. And then I'll ask you to tell me about what Mike Deneen's going to look at, and then we'll come back to what Robert is going to cover then.
Yeah, so exactly, Stuart. Like, you kind of set it out pretty well there. And clover is probably the new the thing we've been talking about it for a good few years. But I suppose as we move on in the next 5 years, like really we're no longer talking about grass only swards. All dairy farms are going to have an aspect of grass clover in their swards to get those nitrogen reduction targets. And look, I suppose Mike is going to talk about that in terms of grass, white clover swards, but he's going to really focus on the first couple of months of the grazing season. He's not going to maybe get into the summer and the back end. It's really going to focus on the first 2 months at grass in terms of nitrogen application on these swards, what we can do there, how intakes on those swards, and how we, I suppose, promote clover at the start of the year. So that's what Mike's going to focus on. It'll be very topical for the time of the year. Farms will just be starting the calf probably the 10 days after the conference. So it'll be a really useful reminder of the things to get right in the first 2 months of grazing.
Yeah, and then Mike Deneen is going to go on to, I suppose, what this is probably the new area for most people. Now, there's a little bit of it done, obviously, but like there's a lot of talk about how the red clover on the outblocks has the potential to really dramatically reduce nitrogen use, obviously, in terms of growing silage swards and so forth. So Mike is going to discuss that.
Mike is going to focus on that, and he's going to look really at the management of red clover swards. But they're pretty new, as you said, Stuart, for most people. But I suppose the massive carrot with them is that you're looking at zero nitrogen or zero chemical nitrogen on them swords and growing very significant amount of grass. But they do have to be managed differently. Red clover isn't the same as white clover. Probably not as persistent under grazing, and probably won't take poaching. So it has to be managed differently. Mike is going to go through that, and also the type of silage that red clover makes, how to make good red clover silage. Mike will go through that and how it will feed out as well. Like Mike Deneen is coming from kind of that fishing background, so he'll be looking at the whole story from growing it to feeding it out to the performance we can expect from cows on red clover.
Very good. And then Robert O'Dea, I know Robert with a good number of years myself from my time working in Limerick. Robert has always been ahead of the curve, I suppose, in terms of taking on, great to take on advice and great to take on a challenge, I would say, as well. So he's gone a long way down the road, as I said there at the very start as well. What kind of numbers are we talking about roughly, like in terms of reduction? Are we?
Yeah, Robert, like as you said, an early adopter to these technologies, and he is he's clover swards getting very small amounts of chemical nitrogen, and he's like in terms of actually the targets that we talk about in terms of reducing chemical nitrogen maybe by 30%. He's probably surpassing that. So he's well away in terms of his system at the moment, in the right place in terms of chemical nitrogen. He's achieved reductions that the whole industry has to get to. So you're listening to someone with a lot of experience, and he's doing that at a fairly large scale as well, in terms of the cow numbers, and he's expanded as well the last couple of years as well to a partnership and stuff like that. So Robert will tell his story. I mean, look, you know the farm very well, Stuart. A really excellent grassland manager. So he's got a really good story on how he's managed to promote the clover, be it through reseeding or through oversown as well. So this is a journey that a lot of dairy farmers are starting. And listening to Robert, you're talking about someone maybe that's 3 or 4 years down the line, like.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I suppose I often get given out to maybe that we don't talk about the downsides or the potential risks that can be associated with this, but Robert is going to cover all of that as well in terms of the lower spring growth and the risk associated with bloat as well, isn't he?
White clover is going to be a really important part of all our dairy systems and all our grazing dairy systems. But look, there are issues, and you can't ignore the bloat one. Is like it has the potential, if not managed properly, to do fairly enormous damage to your farm in terms of losing cows and even the mental strain that having gone out in the morning and not being sure whether you're going to find cows kind of dead or alive. So that has to be managed properly. And as I said, farms that have a lot of clover, there's different management of how lads are reducing it, and Robert will tell his story on that. And then obviously you're going to have a little less spring growth, but Robert will deal with that in terms of that, and that's probably come through from the trials in Moore Park and Clonakilty as well. Previously, the lower spring growth, but I would say those are not insurmountable challenges, and Robert has a good story on all that, you know.
Yeah, very good. So in fairness, it's a nice mix of stuff there in terms of both the theory side, I suppose, and the practical side in every one of the sessions as well. So it's a good day out for people to consider attending, and some really practical advice there. Like I think especially like you said there, for people all people really need to know is the way forward really, and see some people maybe. I suppose we can talk about it a lot, but at your level, in terms of from the co-op's perspective, in terms of what you'd like people to do, and obviously we can speak from the research point of view that we've seen here within Moore Park and so and across the other research centres as well, as to how people can do this. But often it's the person the farmer that's actually doing it themselves already that is the catalyst. I've mentioned that word 3 or 4 times today, to actually getting people to adapt or adopt these technologies, because I suppose there's always that bit of a fear, and as I said, Robert is early to go for these things, and his experience around it, and people will be able to learn from his experience. No different that they will be able to learn from what David's thinking in terms of his planning, and also from Francis as well in terms of what he's after doing on his farm. So that it's a very good day. As I said, it's on the Wednesday the 18th of January, and just to remind people that people need to register if they're going to do that, and they can do that online by accessing irishgrassland.com. I suppose the other thing, Vinny, just to mention it very briefly, is there's a pre-conference event that people may or may not be interested in. Again, you try to hit the target in terms of something that you feel might be of pertinence to people to attend. And you're looking at a kind of a farm succession piece, which is obviously important, and you'll have a better handle on it than I would, even from the Aurivo point of view, in terms of the age profile of your supplier base, etc. And in a lot of cases, most of those reflect the national picture as well. So we do have an ageing dairy farming population. That succession piece is an important piece. So what's going to be covered on the night before the conference?
Yeah, so we've our former past president, Paul Hyland, is chairing the event, and Ashley Meehan, who does a lot of work in the agricultural sector on succession, is just going to have a conversation. There, like, you know, the events, there'll be questions from the floor and comments from the floor as well. But it's just looking at successful succession basically, and that can be within families, and it can be as well where you're bringing people in outside and farm partnerships. And like it's a difficult topic, succession, and as you've said, Stuart, there's an aging dairy farmer population. There's in some cases there's people who have maybe no natural successor within the farm, and then you have younger people who would like to get into dairy farming. Maybe the home farm isn't financially viable. Dairy farm might be too small or too fragmented. So it's about just how we develop successful partnerships, and it's really about planning maybe. And look, Ashley has a wealth of experience on that, both good and bad, it has to be said. There's no point pretending all succession is good. I mean, it's a really difficult and sensitive topic, but I think it's really worth talking about for an hour the night before. I think it'll be a really interesting session, and as I said, Ashley has got, you know, the wealth of experience in terms of developing these partnerships and agreements, and maybe what's gone well and what's maybe not gone so well. So definitely well worth attending, like particularly if your family farm is in that space. Like,
yeah, and I would say, Vinny, as well, that I often think that like people can, it's never too early to actually be thinking about this kind of thing, because it's it might be 10 years before you're going to do anything. It could be 15 years before you're going to do anything. But just being aware of what is out there in terms of options, and just the consciousness, kind of just to have a level of consciousness of what are the options around succession subsequently, like, and maybe just again, like I said, in relation to the farmer speaking the following day, their experience, you're also going, obviously we're not going to get individual case experience, but you're going to get the experience that Aisling has, as you said, of dealing with good and bad. She'll be able to give you examples of what you kind of shouldn't do and what people should be considering and doing as well. So it'll be well worth attending now. It'll be a good event, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As you said, the most important thing people do is start the conversation and start being aware of the options, because there's loads of different options around succession and stuff like that. And look, the tax system and stuff like that is geared towards helping people with that. So, as you said, it's never too early as well,
Yeah, and I suppose the final point again, just on the succession piece, it's not a decision that should be made overnight. There can be, like you said, you mentioned the tax piece there can be a bit of planning needed around that. There needs to be kind of obviously legal side of things need to be planned as well. So it's not a process that it's not like flicking on a light switch that you just do it. People need to be thinking about this. And as I said, I think there'll be a lot of people might be looking at that session saying, oh, they're not in that space right now, as you might have said there earlier. But there's definitely something to be got from that session for everybody, I would think so. It's like if you're booked in for the conference, you're entitled to attend that on the night before. So people should consider it, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah, no, very, very fair point. And people work very hard in their dairy farms, and you don't want to see that maybe thrown away or whatever by maybe not thinking about planning it. And as you said, if you can start, you're not going to make any final decisions the night before the conference, but it's just part of the process of developing your plans for your family and your family farm.
Very good, Vinny. So we wish you all the best with the conference and the night before as well, obviously. Hopefully all goes well, and we look forward to talking to you again into the future, and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks a million, Stuart. Thanks very much for having me on.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Vincent Griffith for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.